We called ourselves the Civilized Core. For 10,000 solar cycles, the Galactic Concordat maintained an unassailable universe built upon the foundational pillars of advanced mathematics, sublime artistry, and deep philosophical enlightenment. We had swept across the stars not with weapons of conquest, but with open hands and minds eager to learn. To our people, violence was not merely a tragic historical footnote. It was a psychological disease of the primitive mind. It was a sickness that we believed any species intelligent enough to harness the slipstream and split the atom would naturally outgrow. We looked at the stars and saw a grand academy of cooperative enlightenment. We were wrong. We were catastrophically, heartbreakingly wrong. The collective did not care for our mathematics. They did not weep at our art, nor did they possess the capacity to engage with our philosophy. When their jagged, obsidian dreadnoughts tore through the tranquil borders of our outer rim, they did not offer terms of surrender. They did not issue ultimatums, nor did they demand tribute. They offered nothing but absolute, systematic extinction. Our peaceful nature, once held as our greatest evolutionary pride and our highest moral achievement, transformed overnight into our definitive death sentence. We simply did not know how to hate. We did not know how to channel rage. When the enemy came to slaughter our children, we tried to negotiate, and they burned our worlds while we pleaded. We did not know how to fight. Warning: hull integrity at 12%. Retro thrusters offline. Orbital decay imminent. Unknown gravity well locked. Critical failure in primary atmospheric seal. As my scout vessel spiraled blindly out of the cold void, bleeding superheated plasma into the dark, I prepared my spirit for the endless sleep. The structural ribs of my ship groaned, a dying mechanical beast singing its final, tragic song. My navigation sensors locked onto a planet directly ahead. It was a cruel, turbulent, violently churning blue marble trapped in the neglected, dusty outer spiral arm of the galaxy. The Galactic Archives had designated this place a Category 9 Death World. It was a cosmic graveyard of evolutionary dead ends. I fully expected the violence of the atmospheric entry to tear my shattered hull apart and grant me a quick release. I had no idea that what waited below that toxic, swirling blue atmosphere was a force far, far more terrifying than the cold embrace of death. When I finally regained consciousness, the emergency systems of my vessel were screaming in a frantic, high-pitched chorus. I forced my primary optics open, wiping away the dark, violet fluids of my own head wounds, and stared at the atmospheric readouts in absolute, paralyzing horror. The air directly outside my cracked canopy was heavily contaminated. It was nitrogen-based, yes, but choked with nearly 21% raw, highly volatile, corrosive oxygen. It was an atmospheric composition that should have burned away any chance of complex, multicellular life before it could even begin. Furthermore, the gravity of this blue world was a crushing nightmare. It pulled at me with nearly 3 times the standard baseline of the Galactic Concordat. My very skeletal structure groaned under the immense atmospheric weight, my internal organs straining just from the simple act of sitting upright in my pilot harness. Every instinct told me to close my eyes and let the poison take me. Suddenly, the heavy, reinforced emergency hatch of my vessel did not just unlock. It was violently, catastrophically rent completely from its hydraulic hinges. The thick metal buckled outward with a deafening screech, as if struck by a kinetic atmospheric ram. I shrank back into the deepest shadows of the ruined cockpit, trembling, preparing myself to face whatever apex predator had hunted down my burning wreckage. Thick, heavy shadows blocked out the harsh, white sunlight of the planet. There was not one creature standing there, but 3. They stood completely upright on 2 bipedal limbs, with 2 upper appendages resting at their sides. They possessed no defensive chitinous plating to protect them from harm. They had no razor-sharp talons, no venomous stingers, and no natural armor. To my galactic eyes, they looked incredibly fragile. They looked soft. They wore primitive, rugged garments woven from synthetic fibers and carried heavy, crude kinetic weapons forged from basic iron and steel. One of these entities stepped forward, entering the toxic, crushing, smoke-filled environment of my ruined ship. It did not choke on the volatile oxygen. Its thick, heavy bones did not snap under the brutal gravity of its home world. It moved with a terrifying, heavy grace, a chilling precision of dense muscles that could only be honed by an evolutionary history of relentless, untamed pursuit hunting. It turned its head, looking directly into the shadows where I hid. Its eyes were the most deeply disturbing feature I had ever witnessed. They were forward-facing, locked side by side on the front of its skull. It was the definitive, undeniable evolutionary mark of a pure, unadulterated, apex predator. It reached out a massive, five-fingered hand toward me. I closed my optics and braced myself for the end of my life. But they did not eat me. In fact, they did something that defied every known law of predatory biology in the galactic core. They did not slaughter the weak, wounded creature in their territory. Instead, they carefully lifted me from the wreckage, shielding my eyes from their harsh sun, and transported me to a heavily fortified medical facility. They analyzed my alien biology with shocking speed, adapted their own climate control systems to perfectly mimic my homeworld's light gravity and thin air, and provided me with synthesized, non-toxic nutrients. They called themselves humans, and their turbulent, death-world home was named Earth. Over the next 3 planetary rotations, as my automated translator matrix slowly and painfully decoded the harsh, guttural, frequency-heavy dialects of their language, I began to study them. I used the terminal they provided to access their global data networks, diving deep into the history of this strange, bipedal species. The more I learned, the more my skin crawled with a cold, paralyzing dread that I had never felt even during the worst days of the Collective's invasion. In the Galactic Concordat, when 2 separate species had a dispute over territories or scarce resources, we calculated the mathematical equity of the situation, engaged in diplomatic arbitration, and reached a peaceful compromise. When humans had a dispute over territory, they tore their entire world apart without a second thought. I watched the historical archives of their global conflicts, spanning thousands of their years. My mind fractured as I watched footage of millions of them marching directly into walls of chemical fire, mud, and flying metal. I saw them inventing terrible weapons that could split the very atoms of creation, deliberately poisoning their own skies with radiation and ash, just to spite their own kind over lines drawn in the dirt. They had spent thousands of generations perfecting the art of killing each other. They were a species that should have gone extinct in their own infancy. Yet, miraculously, through sheer, stubborn refusal to die, they had survived themselves. They were a walking, breathing paradox of nature. I read records of individuals who would risk their own lives to save a stray domestic animal from a burning building. And in the very next hour, engineers from the same culture would design a weaponized virus capable of wiping out millions of their fellow humans. They felt physical pain acutely. They felt crippling fear. They felt a sorrow so deep and heavy that it could paralyze their minds for weeks. They called this emotional weight despair. But humans did not let the despair stop them from moving forward. They did not surrender to it. They weaponized it. They took their grief, their losses, and their tragedies, and they forged them into an indomitable, terrifying will to conquer whatever was hurting them. One evening, a human male entered my medical quarters. He was a military commander named Vance. He did not look like a monster. He was older, his hair dusted with silver, and he wore a crisp, dark uniform adorned with small metallic ribbons, tokens and medals of bloody battles he had personally survived on this nightmare planet. He sat heavily in a chair across from me, leaning his forearms on his knees. His forward-facing eyes locked onto mine with an intensity that felt like a physical weight in the room. "Your translator working, friend? Good. We've been looking over the encrypted flight logs and the data cores recovered from your ship. Our tech guys have been translating the files around the clock. This entity you call the Collective, they have wiped out entire star systems? Just erased civilized worlds from the map?" I looked at him, my voice trembling, filled with the crushing weight of my dying people. "Yes, They possess dreadnoughts that can shatter the crust of a world. They do not feel fear. They do not hesitate, because they operate on a hive mind network of absolute cold logic. They have trillions of cybernetic and biological soldiers raining down from the skies. Our fleets were dismantled in a matter of days. Our soldiers wept and laid down their arms because the slaughter was too immense to bear. There is no hope for us. The galaxy is entering a permanent dark age of silent ash. We are filled with a despair that your young world cannot possibly comprehend. Commander Vance let out a low, slow chuckle. It wasn't a laugh of joy. It was a dry, hollow sound that sent a cold shiver down my spine. No hope, huh? Trillions of them coming down all at once. Honestly, that sounds perfect. See, you folks in the Galactic Core have lived in a peaceful paradise for way too long. You've forgotten what to do when the lights go out and the walls start closing in. You break. But humanity? We were born in the dark. We've been fighting for every single scrap of air, water, and dirt since the day we crawled out of the prehistoric mud. We are experts at being outnumbered. If your galactic concordat has the credits, the raw star metals, and the manufacturing technology, then we have exactly the kind of monsters you need to hire. It was in that exact moment, looking into Commander Vance's cold, unblinking, predatory eyes, that a wildly terrifying, utterly insane idea took root in my mind. The Concordat was a vast society of pacifists, poets, scientists, and master engineers. We had trillions of credits, infinite stockpiles of raw materials, and the advanced technology required to build starships that could cross the universe in the blink of an eye. But we lacked the vital, brutal spark. We lacked the will to pull the trigger when an enemy looked us in the face. Humanity had the trigger fingers. They had the historical rage. They had the terrifying, relentless, blood-soaked spirit of a species that looked into the abyss of extinction and told it to move out of the way. We didn't need to learn how to fight. We didn't need to try and rebuild our shattered spirits. We just needed to outsource our despair to Earth. We would build the weapons, we would supply the ships, and we would let the monsters of Earth loose upon the galaxy. The journey from the toxic, crushing surface of Earth back to the glittering orbital spires of the Galactic Concordat was a voyage across a psychological chasm. Sitting beside Commander Vance in the diplomatic transport, I watched him study the smooth, seamless lines of our technology. He did not marvel at our artistry or the elegance of our crystal matrices. He was tracing our power conduits, calculating our structural integrity under stress, and looking for defensive weak points in the hull. He was looking at a masterpiece of galactic architecture and seeing a fortress that had forgotten how to build a defense wall. I realized then that while we had spent 10 millennia escaping our primitive past, humanity had brought their past with them into the future, polished it, and loaded it into a magazine. Every time I tried to speak of galactic history, he asked about our logistical supply lines, our fuel capacities, and our radar ranges. His mind was structured entirely around the geography of conflict. When the heavy blast doors of the Grand Citadel finally slid open, the High Ministers of the Concordat sat in their tiered, shimmering crystalline amphitheater. They looked down upon us with long, elegant faces pale from weeks of terror and sleepless cycles. Their eyes were wide, completely hollowed out by the sudden realization that their peaceful universe was burning to ash. The reports from the front lines were scrolling across the central holographic arrays in a relentless cascade of crimson static. Another colony world gone silent. Another defensive fleet turned to drifting scrap. Another system systematically erased by the cold, unblinking efficiency of the collective. The atmosphere in the Grand Chamber was thick with panic, a suffocating weight of realization that their philosophy was entirely useless against a threat that did not speak or negotiate. The Prime Minister, a venerable scholar named Kalen, leaned over the central dais. The journey from the toxic, crushing surface of Earth back to the glittering orbital spires of the Galactic Concordat was a voyage across a psychological chasm. Sitting beside Commander Vance in the diplomatic transport, I watched him study the smooth, seamless lines of our technology. He did not marvel at our artistry or the elegance of our crystal matrices. He was tracing our power conduits, calculating our structural integrity under stress, and looking for defensive weak points in the hull. He was looking at a masterpiece of galactic architecture and seeing a fortress that had forgotten how to build a defense wall. I realized then that while we had spent 10 millennia escaping our primitive past, humanity had brought their past with them into the future, polished it, and loaded it into a magazine. Every time I tried to speak of galactic history, he asked about our logistical supply lines, our fuel capacities, and our radar ranges. His mind was structured entirely around the geography of conflict. When the heavy blast doors of the Grand Citadel finally slid open, the high ministers of the Concordat sat in their tiered, shimmering crystalline amphitheater. They looked down upon us with long, elegant faces pale from weeks of terror and sleepless cycles. Their eyes were wide, completely hollowed out by the sudden realization that their peaceful universe was burning to ash. The reports from the front lines were scrolling across the central holographic arrays in a relentless cascade of crimson static. Another colony world gone silent. Another defensive fleet turned to drifting scrap. Another system systematically erased by the cold, unblinking efficiency of the collective. The atmosphere in the Grand Chamber was thick with panic, a suffocating weight of realization that their philosophy was entirely useless against a threat that did not speak or negotiate. The Prime Minister, a venerable scholar named Kalen, leaned over the central dais. His voice was a thin, trembling whisper that echoed off the high, vaulted ceilings. He spoke not with the authority of a ruler, but with the fragile, breaking desperation of a parent watching a tidal wave approach. He looked at me, then his gaze shifted to the humans standing at my side, analyzing the heavy garments and the rugged posture of the Deathworlder. Messenger, you returned to us from the Dark Rim. Your report states that you have discovered a sentient species inhabiting a Category 9 Death World. You claim they possess the physical and psychological capacity to engage the collective in open warfare. But look at this creature you bring before us. It has no protective armor. It has no natural weapons. It is small, fragile, and completely unshielded by nature. How can a species that has not even mastered its own atmospheric turbulence stand against a hive mind that shatters planets with a single command? I stepped forward into the harsh light of the central array, my knees trembling under the weight of my own terrifying proposal. Minister, you look at the human form and you see weakness because you are measuring them by the laws of our peaceful core. You are looking at their skin, but you are not looking at their history. This species has spent 5,000 orbital cycles doing nothing but inventing complex, terrifying ways to tear itself apart. They live on a world where the very air tries to corrode their lungs, where the gravity tries to crush their bones, and where the native apex predators hunt them from the shadows. They did not survive their world by being soft or compliant. They survived by becoming the most relentless, pathologically stubborn pursuit predators the cosmos has ever engineered. If you shoot a human, their body does not simply shut down. Their biology floods their system with chemicals that dull the pain and increase their strength. They can fight with broken limbs. They can march for days without sustenance. They do not know how to submit to fate. A murmur of profound discomfort rippled through the tiered ranks of the alien ministers. To a society that viewed violence as a primitive disease, my words sounded like pure madness. A high minister from the inner agricultural sectors stood up, his colorful silken robes shaking with indignation as he pointed an elegant finger toward Commander Vance. This is barbaric. We are the Galactic Concordat. We are a collective of thinkers, artists, and architects. Are you suggesting that we invite a species of unhinged, violent death world monsters into our sacred halls? Are you suggesting we hand our finest technology over to a race that treats war as a cultural pastime? If they defeat the collective, what is to stop them from turning those very weapons upon us and burning the core to ash? We would be replacing one executioner with another. Look at their database. They have dropped nuclear fire on their own cities. They cannot be trusted with the keys to the galaxy. Commander Vance stepped forward, the heavy, rhythmic thud of his black combat boots cutting through the soft, musical acoustics of the chamber like a hammer striking an anvil. He did not bow to the council. He did not offer a formal galactic greeting or wait to be recognized. He simply placed both of his heavy hands on the edge of the diplomatic dais, leaned forward, and locked his forward-facing eyes onto the trembling agricultural minister. The sudden movement caused several guards to shift their weight in panic. What stops us, Minister, is that we have a code. And right now, your code is getting you slaughtered. You're sitting up here in your crystal palace debating the morality of survival while a nightmare is systematically erasing your families from existence. You want to know what we are? We are the people you call when you realize that your poetry can't stop a kinetic slug. We don't want your crystal towers. We don't want your art galleries or your philosophy. We want a future where our children don't have to look at the stars and wonder if a dreadnought is coming to burn our atmosphere away. We know exactly what we've done to our own world. We know the cost of war better than anyone in this room. And that is precisely why we are the only ones who can win this for you. Vance paused, letting the cold steel of his voice settle over the terrified assembly. He reached into his uniform pocket and pulled out a small, rugged data drive, tossing it onto the pristine glass surface of the central table where it slid across the council seal. On that drive, you'll find the blueprints for human orbital shipyards, our atmospheric defense grids, and our heavy ballistic designs. We don't have the materials to build them on a galactic scale. We don't have your anti-gravity engines, your hyperspatial drives, or your endless pools of liquid credits. But if you provide the factory worlds, if you supply the raw star metals, and if you give us the keys to your logistics networks, we will build a wall between you and the collective that nothing in this universe can breach. We will sign a contract. You provide the means of production, and humanity will provide the violence. We will take your despair, and we will turn it into ammunition. If you reject us, you can die with your moral superiority intact. The choice is yours. The Prime Minister stared down at the small data drive, his long fingers hovering over it, as if it were a venomous creature. He looked back up at the holographic map of the galaxy, watching another green star system flicker, turn crimson, and die in real time. The collective was moving faster now. They were 6 solar cycles away from the inner core. There was no time left for philosophy. There was no room left for compromise or lengthy debates on ethics. Kalen looked at Vance, his voice cracking with an immense, historic grief that seemed to age him by centuries. If we do this, if we authorize this contract, we are unleashing a dark force upon the cosmos that can never be put back into its cage. We are trading our soul for our survival. We are asking you to become our monsters. Commander Vance smiled. It was a slow, predatory tightening of his lips that showed too many white teeth. It was an expression born of a world where survival was never guaranteed, and where victory was always paid for in blood and sacrifice. Minister, your soul won't do you much good if you're dead. Let us worry about the dark. We're used to it. Just sign the paper, give us the steel, and get out of our way. The vote that followed was entirely silent. It was passed not with a joyous cheer, but with a heavy, suffocating dread that settled over the entire assembly. The golden seals of the Concordat were stamped onto the human charter, finalizing the most unorthodox alliance in history. Within 3 planetary rotations, the largest industrial logistics operation in galactic history was set into motion across 1,000 star systems. We opened the deep vaults of our factory worlds, sectors that had not seen heavy manual labor in centuries. We diverted entire asteroid mining fleets directly to human supply lines, routing millions of tons of raw titanium and dense star alloys to their engineers. We handed over our antimatter reactors, our slipstream drives, and our automated assembly matrices. The humans did not build elegant, beautiful starships that harmonized with the cosmic geometry. They did not care about aesthetic beauty or artistic flow. They took our beautiful, aerodynamic designs and stripped them down to the bare, brutal essentials. They covered our sleek hulls with thick, jagged plates of heavy ablation armor that looked like raw iron. They replaced our scientific sensor arrays with massive, multi-barreled kinetic railguns and deep tubes designed to launch nuclear payloads into the void. They turned our peaceful transport vessels into heavy, black, fire-breathing dreadnoughts. They built ships that did not look like tools of exploration, but like weapons of pure vengeance. The quiet sectors of the galaxy suddenly echoed with the continuous roar of human welding torches and the mechanical rhythm of weapons testing. They worked without sleep, driven by an industrial ferocity that terrified our overseers. They treated the approaching war not as a disaster, but as a project that required absolute precision. I stood beside Commander Vance in the central command deck of the newly christened Vanguard flagship, named the Humanity's Wrath. The ship did not have the comfortable climate controls or the soft lighting of our traditional vessels. It smelled of industrial grease, volatile ozone, and raw, unpainted iron. Looking out into the primary view screen, I saw thousands of identical black hulls tearing out of the orbital shipyards, their engines burning with a fierce, angry orange light that cast long shadows across the stars. The civilized core had spent 10,000 years trying to build a heaven among the stars, believing that peace was the natural state of the universe. But as the automated sirens began to wail across the command deck, signaling that the collective's Vanguard fleet had finally dropped out of warp at the edge of the system, I realized something that made my blood run cold. Heaven was officially closed. The monsters of Earth had taken over the keys to our civilization, and they were about to show the collective exactly how to turn the quiet void into an absolute, burning hell. The void of space did not scream when the collective arrived, but the sensors on the primary command deck of the Humanity's Wrath painted a picture of absolute, unadulterated cosmic terror. Millions of jagged, obsidian hulls materialized at the absolute edge of the star system, dropping out of the slipstream in a flawless, perfectly synchronized formation that blocked out the distant, ancient light of the stars. They moved with the terrifying, uniform precision of a single machine mind operating on billions of variables simultaneously. There were no battle cries echoing across their communications networks, no hesitation in their steady, methodical advance. They were a tidal wave of cold, mechanical logic, a plague of metal that had never encountered a single force in the universe capable of halting their progress. On the central tactical display of our ship, the collective's numbers outnumbered our combined fleet 6-1. To any species born and raised in the civilized core, this mapping was a mathematical certainty of absolute defeat. It was the exact moment where you lay down your weapons, close your optics, and pray to the ancestors for a swift, painless end. But the humans standing across the command deck did not pray. They did not weep, nor did they look to the sky for a savior. I watched them closely, bracing myself to see the paralyzing weight of despair break their fragile spirits. But instead, I witnessed a terrifying, silent transformation take place within their ranks. Their movements did not slow down. They became incredibly fast, deliberate, and entirely stripped of human fear. The air on the bridge grew thick and heavy with the sharp scent of sweat, chemical adrenaline, and recycled oxygen as hundreds of human operators locked their forward-facing eyes onto their individual targeting screens. They were not looking at an impending slaughter. They were looking at a target-rich environment. They were measuring angles of interception, tracking reactor signatures, and heating up magnetic capacitors. Commander Vance stood perfectly still at the center of the command deck, his heavy, weathered hands gripping the edge of the metal tactical railing with an intensity that turned his knuckles stark white. His face was a mask of cold, unyielding stone, his eyes reflecting the harsh, rhythmic crimson light of the primary battle alarms. He did not look at the staggering numbers on the screen with a single shred of hesitation. He looked at them with a grim, calculating hunger that belonged to a prehistoric apex predator tracking its prey across the dangerous plains of Earth. He keyed the fleet-wide communications channel, his voice echoing clearly through the calm links of thousands of black, heavily armored human dreadnoughts waiting silently in the absolute dark of the planetary shadow. All ships, all crews, this is Commander Vance. Look out your primary view screen right now. That is the monster that has been terrorizing the galaxy for thousands of solar cycles. That is the thing that thinks it can erase entire civilizations from existence without facing a real fight. They are coming into this system thinking they are going to clean up another group of helpless pacifists who will beg for mercy. They think we are going to break under their numbers. They think we are going to turn our ships around and run back into the dark. But they do not know who we are. They do not know what kind of brutal, bloody hell we had to crawl out of just to build these engines and reach these stars. Today, we show them what happens when you push a species of pursuit predators into a corner. Today, we show them why you never, ever let a Deathworlder build a warship. Hold your fire until they hit the primary coordinate marker. Do not let them know we are here until they are close enough to see the teeth in our jaw. Stay dark, stay silent, and wait for my mark. The carrier was struck simultaneously by a full volley of human nuclear torpedoes. The immense detonation did not just disable the enemy vessel. It tore the Titanic ship completely in half. A blinding, multi-million-degree flash of atomic fire illuminating the dark space for millions of kilometers in every direction. For the first time in 10,000 solar cycles of galactic history, the collective hesitated. Their perfect machine coordination staggered. The central machine mind was running billions of calculations per second, desperately trying to understand why this new species was not retreating in the face of casualties, trying to process the psychological anomaly of a prey animal that actively charged directly into the open jaws of the predator. They had no data for a species that used controlled nuclear explosions as a standard combat doctrine. But humanity did not give the machine mind a single second to recalculate its parameters. Commander Vance ordered the heavy dreadnoughts to push forward at maximum acceleration, diving straight into the bleeding heart of the enemy formation. The ships moved so close to one another that they scraped hull against hull, metal grinding against metal in the dark. Human gunners fired their point defense autocannons directly into the open launch bays and hangar doors of the collective's vessels, tearing them apart from the inside out. It was a brutal, claustrophobic, terrifying style of warfare that the civilized core had never even conceived in its worst nightmares. It was a desperate street fight among the stars. Humans were fighting with the white-hot, collective rage of a species that knew exactly what it felt like to lose everything. And they were channeling every single ounce of that ancestral trauma directly into their triggers. I watched a damaged human cruiser, its primary engines completely failing and its central hull venting precious oxygen into the freezing vacuum of space, deliberately lock its steering thrusters and ram its entire multi-ton structure directly into the command bridge of a massive enemy flagship. They did not surrender their colors. They did not flee in their escape pods to save their own skin. They took their deep despair, their mortality, and their grief, and they used their own dying vessel as a final, catastrophic kinetic hammer to drag the enemy down into the grave with them. They embraced death if it meant taking a piece of the enemy along for the journey. Hours bled into cycles, and the crimson tide of enemy signatures on the tactical map began to recede for the first time since the war began. The millions of Obsidian ships that had arrived in this system to claim an easy, unchallenged extinction were being systematically dismantled, broken apart piece by a race that simply refused to understand the mathematical probability of their own defeat. The collective's hive mind network, built entirely upon the logical assumption that all living things choose survival over destruction, was fracturing under the sheer, unadulterated madness of human determination. They were being outfought, outmaneuvered, and utterly consumed by a primal ferocity that they could neither calculate nor comprehend. The humans were not fighting for territory or resources. They were fighting for the right to exist, and that motive had no limits in their psychology. When the final collective dreadnought turned its damaged hull to flee, burning its sublight engines in a desperate attempt to escape back into the deep dark of the slipstream, 3 human heavy corvettes pursued it through the wreckage. hunting it down like winter wolves tracking a wounded beast across the snow, until its primary antimatter reactor went critical and illuminated the void with a final, silent flash of brilliant blue light. The silence that followed across the central command deck of the Humanity's Wrath was heavy, suffocating, and deeply profound. The automated battle alarms had finally ceased their frantic wailing, leaving only the quiet hum of cooling electronics. The primary tactical screen was entirely clear of enemy signatures. The star system was completely quiet once more, save for the massive, drifting graveyard of shattered obsidian metal and twisted steel that stretched across the entire orbital plane of the planet below. I looked around the command deck, my own breathing ragged and uneven. The human operators were slumping back in their metal seats, their faces covered in black soot, grease, and sweat, their hands visibly shaking from the sudden, fading rush of chemical adrenaline. Many of them were bleeding from minor impact injuries sustained during the maneuvers. Others were silently staring at the empty tactical screens, processing the heavy names of the comrades and friends they had lost in the fire of the battle. They were exhausted, broken in body, and carrying the immense sorrow of the sacrifice they had just made. They were feeling that heavy, uniquely human despair once again. The joy of victory was overshadowed by the deep toll of the combat. But as Commander Vance walked slowly over to my observation station, his heavy, blood-stained hand coming down onto my shoulder with a reassuring, grounding weight, I looked up into his tired, weathered eyes and realized something that changed the way I viewed the cosmos forever. The Galactic Concordat had spent 10,000 solar cycles running away from the dark, thinking that our fragile peace could be preserved by simply ignoring the existence of the universe's monsters. We had nearly died because of our own beautiful innocence. We had built a society of glass that shattered at the first sign of a hammer. But humanity had looked directly into the darkest corners of existence, accepted their own inner monsters, and used that darkness to save our entire civilization from being wiped off the galactic map. They had taken our fragile, breaking world, and they had shielded it from extinction with their own blood, iron, and unyielding will. The galaxy would never return to the peaceful, naive paradise it once was before the collective arrived. The scars of this day, and the thousands of human lives lost in the void, would remain deeply etched into the stars for generations to come. Every colony that looked up at the sky would see the remnants of the ships that protected them. But as I looked out through the primary viewing port at the burning, silent remnants of the enemy fleet, I knew in my soul that our people were finally safe from the dark. We would never have to live in fear of extinction again. Because whenever the monsters of the deep universe came to bring despair to our shores, we would simply open our vaults, hand over our star medals, and outsource that despair to the terrifying, beautiful, and completely relentless souls of Earth.